Hello viewers, welcome to week 7, lecture 1 of SWAYAM course on 20th century literary criticism and theory part 1. I am Ashish Kumar Pathak, assistant professor, Department of English, Banaras Hindu University. In this lecture, I am going to talk about speech act theory. As we know that if we the speech act theory, how it was developed by the philosopher John Austin in his posthumous work How to Do Things with Words, which was published in 1962. If we look at this term, speech act, it clearly gives us the message that speech is not simply a sentence or utterance that we make for the sake of imparting information, but it is itself a sort of action. So, language that we use for the purpose of communication, it is not confined to the transmission of messages. Rather, it is itself a sort of action. And in this way, this theory was later explored and expanded by other philosophers such as John Searle and H.B. Greece. Speech act theory is a subfield of pragmatics, which believes that language is a sum of information and action, information plus action. For instance, we see many newspaper reports. These newspaper reports, they are about something. Many times these reports, they are capable of bringing changes in the world. So here we find that how this report is very different from any activity or event which can be taken as a physical action. So in this way, we understand what is a speech act. A report is a speech act. A command is a speech act. A statement that we make is a speech act. A declaration that we make is a speech act. A promise that we make is a speech act. So making of any utterance, whether it is a literary text, even it is also a sort of speech act that we will discuss towards the end of this theory, and how Searle has emphasized that idea. In fact, Austin's theory was directed against two very traditional tendencies of philosophers, the way they looked at speech acts. Right? So Austin decries their tendency to isolate sentences and abstract them from their context or a discourse or their attending circumstances, and in a way analyzing it in isolation. This was something that he was opposed to. And the second tendency, which he assumed as erroneous, that any standard statement or sentence was taken as if whether it is making a statement about something in real sense or unreal sense, whether it is true or false, whether it is valid or invalid. So in this way, he says that sentences cannot be judged by these limited and narrow parameters. And against that, Austin and Searle, such thinkers, they developed their theory of speech act. For example, Austin makes a distinction between constative and performative utterances. He says that constative utterances are sentences that describe a situation or that make a claim about a status or event which can be judged in terms of true or false. For example, the sky is blue or water boils at 100 degrees Celsius are constative statements. We can, verify them in terms of true or false. We can always check it whether the sky is blue or not, whether the water is boiling at 100 degrees Celsius or not. And he also talks about performatives. Performatives, he says, on the other hand, do not just describe things, they also perform an action. For instance, many utterances that we make. If somebody says, I promise to call you, or I apologize, there we find that these are not simply things to be verified as true or false. They are related to the actions, they are related to the performance. So, at first level, we find that how Austin tried to divide all languages into these two categories. But as he analyzed real life examples, he found that this division does not always hold. Many performative sentences also involve stating something about the world, and many constantives can have action function. So this led him to refine his theory further. So he also tries to overcome this dichotomy of constative and performative, and he believes that there is a porous wall between them. We cannot understand constative and performative in terms of watertight division. Further, they also distinguish between a sentence and an utterance. The difference between a sentence and utterance is that sentence is simply arrangement of words in a syntactical order. We can look at a sentence in context of various words which are put together. It is a string of words. But so far as an utterance is concerned, an utterance has a particular context. An utterance is a sentence which has a particular context. Not only context, it has also an intention. An utterance is always made with some intention, which is implicit in it. It may be explicit as well, but it is always here. And the third dimension of an utterance is that an utterance is something which is capable of affecting the word. I mean, it has an effect on the listener. So in this way, sentence and utterance are different. That sentence is unitary in the sense that syntactical arrangement of words or how words are stringed together, but an utterance has three aspects. That is the particular context, the intention, or the effect it has on the listener. Further, John Searle's adoption and elaboration of Austin's speech act theory claims that we should attend to the overall linguistic and situational context of a speech. When we consider the institutional conditions that govern many uses of language, we find that in speaking or writing, we perform simultaneously three and sometimes four distinguishable kinds of speech acts: locutionary, elocutionary, and perlocutionary. So far as locutionary act is concerned, its simple purpose, its basic purpose is just to make a meaning. For example, a locutionary act is confined to its verification of grammatical and syntactical structures. If it is grammatically correct, if it is syntactically correct, it's okay. For example, if there is a sentence, I'll be there at 5. So if it is a locutionary act, it has a structure and it has simply a meaning that we understand. But when we talk about elocution, it means that a given sentence has a force beyond its structure and beyond its meaning. That is how it is called elocutionary. It involves, or what is implicit in it, the speaker's intention or intended function. For example, the author is making these utterances, elocutionary utterances, or elocutionary act is being performed because he wants to say something. He promises to do something. He declares to do. In that sense, I'll be there at 5 p.m. It is not a simple statement. It is not simply a sentence syntactically correct or grammatically correct. It is more than that. It means it shows that the person is making a promise. He will be there at 5. So in this way, it gets a kind of force because of its promising tendency, because of this intention of promise, which this sentence hides in itself. And in this way, it becomes elocutionary. So far as perlocutionary act is concerned, so this is about the effect an utterance has on the mind of the addressee or on the mind of the listener. For example, in that sense, it is not mere a syntactical arrangement. It has a force, and there is an impact of that force. There is an impact of that intention on the mind of the listener. So if this statement is made, I'll be there at 5. Maybe this is something that placates the agitated mind of the listener. And in this way, it has an effect of placating, becoming. And this is how we understand this distinction of locutionary act, elocutionary act, and perlocutionary act. Further, speech acts in terms of their action, they can be, looked as 5 kinds or 5 types of speech acts. So the first one happens to be directives. What are directives? Directives are those utterances which aim to prompt the listener to take specific actions. For example, it gives a kind of order, or it may be making a sort of request, or it may be making a forceful suggestion to the listener to do something. If in a class I say, could you pass me a pen, please? So this could be a directive speech. Or don't forget to finish your work, as if some teacher is telling her students to do that. Put your phone away during class. So kind of instruction given to the examinees by the examiner. So that is how you find that how they all have a sense of receiving direction. Therefore, they are called directives. Commissives. Commissive acts, speech acts, are those which show something as if some promise is involved there, some vow is being taken by them. It shows as if somebody is taking an oath or giving a sort of guarantee. So where all these aspects are involved, they are commissive speech acts. For example, I commit to attend the event next week. I'll make sure to send you the document later. I promise to help you with your project. If we look at these statements, we find that how it is showing a kind of commitment, it is showing a kind of allegiance in which a person is determined to do something, right? Declarations or declarative speech acts. So, declarations are about certain statements or utterances which are capable of bringing palpable change in the world, right? So, this mere act of uttering, it imposes a kind of authority on something. That is declarative. For example, I declare my candidacy for student council president. So this declaration is making a change immediately. It is making an event in the world that somebody is going to contest an election. I proclaim today as a day of celebration. So the celebration will begin now. Proclaiming, that means. So the effect is visible. It is palpable. I officially announce the launch of our new product. It is going to make a change in the market. Or I declare you to be officially husband and wife. So how this moment is going to bring a change in the life of a couple. So in this way, these are declarative speech acts. We have another kind of speech act that is called expressives. These expressives, they demonstrate the psychological states of minds of speaker. Various kinds of emotions and feelings are implicitly, expressed through utterances or sentences. Like you feel sorry, so you apologize. You feel happy, so you congratulate someone. You feel sympathetic towards someone. You are making an utterance which sympathizes with that person. So in that way, these expressive speech acts are also important. For example, I'm sorry for accidentally breaking your toy. I am so excited about our upcoming field trip. Congratulations on winning the game. In all these sentences, we find how various feelings are expressed. Assertives are, speech acts which state a proposition or express a belief. These, speech acts can be true or false, like assertions, claims, and descriptions. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. The capital of France is Paris. Dogs are mammals. The square of any number is always positive. So all these, sentences are subject to, validation. So that is how we understand various types of speech acts. Austin also talks about felicity, that just speech acts are not simply important. Then Austin comes in the area of performativity, that for those speech acts to be performed, certain conditions are to be there, and that is what Austin calls felicity. So to understand how speech acts work properly, Austin developed the idea of felicity conditions. These are the conditions that must be in place for a speech act to be successful or felicitous. For example, this act of promising. So, for a promise to be valid, the speaker must genuinely intend to carry it out. The speaker must believe they can be fulfilled. The listener must want the promise act to happen. So here we find that how all these circumstances like intending, capacity, and willingness, how all these things, they constitute a condition of felicity. So if any of these conditions fail, for example, if the speaker is joking or the listener doesn't want the visit, then the speech act doesn't work in the way it was intended. It might become a threat or even an insult. So, that is how we see. Further, they also talk about events and speech. So, event is a physical occurrence. For example, somebody is married, somebody is dead. These may be taken as events. But, utterances are linguistic expressions about those events. For example, talk of marriage, talk of death. So that is how, we distinguish event from speech. And Himes says that many literary expressions like stories, conversations, formal introductions, they all may be taken as examples of them. Then let us look at another concept, that how literature can be looked upon as a special case of speech acts. So Austin excluded literary language from his study of speech acts because it operates within imagined or fictional settings. But later on, theorists, especially those influenced by deconstruction and post-structuralism, argued that fiction is a prime example of performative language. So I think that it is very pertinent that at this juncture, after concluding that course or unit on structuralism and semiotics, we are discussing it because all these things will be involved in post-structural theory. So there we find that how post-structuralists or deconstructionists, they look at various manifestations, literary works which are manifestations of fiction or, we can say reality. They can be taken as prime examples of performative language. In literary texts, words don't just refer to things, they create them. For example, when a novelist writes, the hero entered the dark forest, they aren't describing something that happened in the real world. Instead, they are bringing a fictional world into being. In this sense, language in literature doesn't just reflect reality, it constructs it. A story does not rely on a pre-existing world. It makes its own world through language. So, Performative speech is not only relevant in literature, it is essential to how literature works. Scholars like Barbara Johnson, in his work Poetry and Performative Language, Malam and Austin, Sandra Petre, Speech Acts and Literary Theory, and Jonathan Culler's Performative Language examined how fictional language can't be clearly divided into constitutives and performatives. They argued that the two modes constantly overlap and interact in fiction, creating a productive tension. Similarly, if we look at Judith Butler's case, like how the power of performative language, there, the idea that language can create identities is central to Judith Butler's work, especially Gender Trouble. Butler argues that terms like man or woman are not neutral descriptions but performative utterances through repeated use in specific contexts. These words shape identities rather than simply labeling them. For example, calling someone a boy repeatedly from birth shapes their behaviors and expectations. So, according to Butler, identity isn't something we are born with, it is something we are called into through language. And this insight has had a major influence on queer theory and debates around gender identity. You know, speech act theory is also discernible in the field of literary criticism. And 1970s onwards, we see how it started influencing scholars. One important application is in discourse analysis, studying how character speech in fiction operates not just at the level of content, but in terms of function and effect. We can take a scene in a novel where a character says, "I'm sorry." A critic might say, is it a genuine apology or a sarcastic one? Is the character performing a social duty? What effect does it have on the other character and on the reader? So, by paying attention to these layers, critics can unpack complex power dynamics, emotions, and relationships in literary text. In many ways, even mimetic text, which are mimetic discourse, has also been subjected to the speech act theory, where scholars have taken speech act theory by reimagining literature as a kind of mimetic discourse. Traditionally, mimesis means literature imitates reality, like a mirror reflection of life. But from the speech act perspective, literature imitates forms of communication. For example, a lyric poem imitates someone expressing personal feelings. A novel might imitate an autobiography like David Copperfield or Tom Jones, or even a scholarly commentary, Pale Fire by Nabokov. A play imitates live dialogue and stage action with embedded speech acts between characters. So, in this way, we find that how literature becomes a simulation of real world discourse, allowing readers to explore human behavior, speech, and intent in a safely functional speech. Further, fiction can also be seen as perlocutionary speech act, right? The way character affects another through speech, or the way a text affects the reader. So, in this way, we find that how these effects may be intended or unintended. A character might try to comfort someone but end up making them more anxious. Similarly, writer may aim to amuse the reader but provoke deeper reflections instead. So, in this way, we come to the conclusion of speech of theory, and we find that how it offers a powerful framework for understanding language, not as a neutral container of information, but as a tool of action. For example, Austin's foundational ideas to Judith Butler's theories of gender and identity, we see how speech act theory helps us see literature not just as mirror of life, but as an active participant in shaping how we think, feel, and relate to another through language. So, in this way, it provides a systematic way of exploring rich complexity of meaning in text, showing that every utterance in literature carries layers of purpose, power, and possibility. So, with this, viewers, I come to the end of this lecture on speech act theory, and we have been able to discuss various aspects of speech act. Thank you.